Democrats promise more funding for urban renewal programs, and yet America's major metropolitan cities are just getting worse and worse and worse. Let's take a look at this lovely video from the Kensington section of Philadelphia. You don't see any of that in Republican-led cities now, do you? You don't. But by all means, put migrants in hotels and feed them 3 times a day. My next guest is a Goldwater Institute Municipal Affairs Liaison, Austin VanDerHeyden. Thank you so much for joining us. You're going to tell me that homelessness is up 92%, or was up 92% in Phoenix, Arizona from 2018 to 2023.
Correct. So in Arizona, we've seen our 2 largest cities, Phoenix and Tucson, just completely overrun by homelessness. And the response of these cities is to just spend hundreds of millions of dollars on this problem. And it's barely made a dent. In fact, things are getting much, much worse. And so like you said, Phoenix, you've seen an increase in 92% in the homelessness rates. In Tucson, they're up 60%. Meanwhile, you've got Phoenix allocating over $180 million to this problem. They can only account for 47 million of it. And so we put out a report saying, kind of where the money's going. We're starting to just ask some of these questions. If you're going to allocate hundreds of millions of dollars with no impact, the taxpayers deserve to know where that money's going. And so that's part of the report that we just put out here at the Goldwater Institute.
I always say that progressives would rather you starve than eat something they don't approve of. It seems like as much as they need the private sector's assistance in this, they're in total opposition to letting the private sector solve problems because then they can't take credit for it. You look at developers, Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump's a developer. The idea that unless homes are created that are perfect in nature, that maybe they're small by some people's standards or even too small by some people's standards, but they're livable, it just seems that there's too many permit and regulation issues that drive the private sector away from helping in these situations, is what I'm saying.
Correct. You're entirely correct. And again, the answer is less government, not more government. And when you're seeing, again, hundreds of millions of dollars being allocated to this with very little accounting for how it's actually being spent, that's becoming the issue. And taxpayers deserve a clear answer to where their money's being spent, where it's going, where it's being allocated, who's getting it, because the problem is getting worse. Like the video you just showed, those are everyday things that we see here in Phoenix, in Tucson, and it's just happening all across the country.
I saw in San Francisco, they're fighting against something called single room occupancy. So basically smaller than a studio. But if your choice is on the street or in maybe what some people would consider tight quarters, I'd rather have tight quarters than be homeless. And if there are developers, the problem is they want this problem solved without somebody. You shouldn't be doing this for a profit. Well, a lot of things worth doing are worth doing for a profit. And if you could solve or greatly reduce homelessness by making, small scale apartments, maybe the size of a hotel room, but in mass, and you can get people off the streets cheaper and perhaps even into jobs because now they have an address. I would rather have single room occupancy than homelessness.
Right. We've heard multiple times the cities say things like it's not compassionate to push these people into a place like this. It's not compassionate to leave these individuals on the streets. It's Phoenix here. It's 105 degrees today, right? The heat is here. We've seen so many people suffer death. Horrible tragedies on the streets. it's not compassionate to leave these individuals on the streets in their current capacity. It'd be much more compassionate to put them in places like you're mentioning, and that's just not the case here.
Also, if we were honest, we keep talking about the housing shortage, but also the millions of people that are in this country illegally. If we were to actually enforce our laws, there'd be a whole lot of vacancies pretty quickly. You know, whether you're a young family trying to afford that first home, or you're a young person looking for an apartment, or maybe you've struggled financially and there are low-income housing units, but if they're being given away to people in the country illegally, your government isn't there for you anymore.
Correct. And down in Tucson's, ground zero for this issue, right? It's right by the border, and they don't even know if they account for migrants being involved in the homeless population. So when they give the homeless counts, we don't even know if migrants are included in that, if they're not included in that. And it's just a horrible tracking metric. And there's really no way of telling. So we could be having millions, hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars going towards, the migrant issue, which is just extrapolating on top of the homelessness issue. And it's a recipe for disaster. And their only solution that they are providing is just spending, spending, spending. Is it working? We don't know. It doesn't seem like it, but that's all they have is just spend, spend, spend.
The libertarian in me doesn't like federal drug laws, but I also know that these cities are gripped in drug addiction and drug use. Like that video we show, I mean, it seems like, there's some sort of synthetic drug coming on the market by the hour, whether it's fentanyl or any of these other things. It seems like the homelessness leads to the rampant drug use.
Correct. You cannot address one without addressing the other. And they really go hand in hand here. And I think that we've seen Phoenix, but mostly Tucson, honestly, start to say things like, these are people that are just down on their luck. These are our neighbors. And yes, while some of them might be, there are so many people that we don't even know if they're from Arizona. We don't know where they're from. We don't know who they are. And fentanyl is, being sold for pennies on the dollar here. It's so easy for these individuals to access. And so when you've got these types of things happening, again, there's just no accountability on the government, and things are just completely out of control.
It's enforce the law, secure the border, and let the private sector do what the private sector does best to solve this homelessness situation. I got to leave it there. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.